Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and happy Easter to everybody. Hopefully you'll celebrate with your family and your religion. It's a very important day, so hopefully you get together with your family. We have a very interesting show today. We have with us in studio Barry Zeplowitz, who has been doing polling, Republican polling, for over 4 decades. He's been involved in numerous elections. These are the behind-the-scenes people that make it work for us, that tell us how to do our elections, what's important. And he's an extremely important person in that regard. He was involved in the 2026 special election, the 61st Senate District. He was involved in the Langworthy-Palladino election. He's done polling for Claudia Tinney, Pat Gallivan, Chris Jacobs, Tim Howard. But he's done national issues and referendum polling. He's conducted broader studies on public issues, including land development, charter schools. So it's a national presence. It's a very broad presence, not just politics, but he's here local with us, and he's in studio today. So welcome, Barry.
Thank you. Good morning.
So look, we want to get right to it. Hochul Blakeman, that's certainly on our minds where that all stands. Blakeman claims that, he's moved up in the polls, but still behind, obviously. So where do you think we are? So in the latest poll I have here from Siena, Hochul is 47, Blakeman is 34, with 15 undecided. What does that all mean to you?
I think that right now, all this early polling means very little. But I think what realistically is likely to happen is that it's still a 13-point lead, and no one has begun the process of defining who he is. Now, if it's true that he may not get public financing, that is going to be devastating because he's going to have to convince a lot of national contributors that he can win. And without probably $30 to $40 million, that's going to be an uphill fight. Second, the state is still a blue state. There's a large pocket of conservative areas, true, but it makes it that much more difficult. I think that we've seen the tenor and tone and direction of his campaign with almost daily press releases and what his messaging is going to be. And so, again, 13 points is substantial, but we're sitting here April 4th, and a great deal can happen. But, too early to tell. Let's see how successful she is in defining him, because he's doing his best to reinforce the negatives on her, but I think his audience is too narrow at this point.
But we know Kathy Hochul well because she comes from Buffalo. I've known her for over 30 years now, and I always considered her like one of the best retail politicians. This is a woman who could walk into any diner and talk to every single person. And I've always said she's not deep. She just talks politics. She knows what to say to an individual. So if she's in a more conservative area, she's going to talk more toward the center. If she's in a liberal area, she's going to talk what downstate people want. This thing about affordability and safety, those to me are the two key words, the two key issues. And this is a woman who has, the politics of the Democrats certainly have not been in favor of safety. They fired all of the correction officers. Affordability, they're the ones who passed the electric mandates. But she's very capable. So is Bruce able to overcome that capability?
I mean, if the election were held today, obviously she would win. I think that this is just a personal observation because I do not know Bruce Blakeman. However, unless he has the funds to be able to get out a message through the various voter contact sources like television, social media, retailing politics on a statewide level is very difficult. And so he's going to need to raise the money. He's going to have to make one or two issues where he's going to be at, because really, in a state like this where the president is not popular, she'll be running against the president as much as she will be against Blakeman, and tying the two together. And so I just hope that there's the opportunity for him to build some momentum, but have the funds behind it to carry through. Otherwise, I think it's extremely difficult.
One of the things that always concerned me when Elise got out of the race is that Elise had raised well over $10 million. So those donors that gave Elise Stefanik over $10 million, are they now going to simply flip over and give more money to Bruce Blakeman in this race? That's very concerning, I think.
I would be concerned also, because I don't think there's any guarantee at all that, I mean, she was very popular. She had formed a very strong base and a national base. And for that to flip over, I just don't think it's going to happen naturally.
Well, again, he's got a lot of work to do. We're sitting here, like you say, April 3rd. We've got time, I suppose. He's gaining in the polls, but I think that's more her negativity in terms of it. What is job approval? You know, when you look at these numbers, they're polling pretty much every week. There's various polls polling pretty much every week. What do you see in trends? How do you feel about job approval, favorability? Yeah. What does that mean?
Here's the way we have historically done it for almost 50 years, and is really the gold standard approach to looking at numbers. When we do a favorable, unfavorable rating, that's a personal thing, personal perception. The approach has always been that if an incumbent has less than a 2-to-1 favorable to unfavorable rating, we consider that person vulnerable. Now, I'm looking at.
So here's
So here's the thing about all this. You see, when you move to a national level, all these basic approaches, you have to throw them out the window, because generally, like in a presidential campaign, we'll have times where neither candidate is more favorable than unfavorable, and so it comes down to just things like voter turnout. But if we're looking at things more, if you're looking at things in a local election, congressional, state, legislature, Senate, that's where these approaches are useful. And so when I do a poll for an incumbent congressman, and if their rating is below 2-to-1 favorable to unfavorable, I said, look, you are vulnerable on the face of it. It does not mean that you're going to lose. It just means that you're vulnerable, and here's your vulnerabilities, and here's what you have to do about it.
So in the latest poll with Kathy, her favorability is 45%. Her unfavorability is 42%. So obviously she's got problems right there.
Now, on the face of it, if we had, again, I don't know Bruce Blakeman. He may turn out to be a great candidate. But I know that we had a woman who would have been able to take, I think, a better advantage of these weak numbers.
Sure.
Because on the face of it, Kathy is vulnerable. But it's the alternative that you provide that determines whether that vulnerability becomes enough to lead to her defeat.
So I've met Bruce Blakeman a number of times. We've had him on the show a number of times. He is a good candidate. He is articulate. He's been involved for quite a while. He won his last election in Nassau County by a substantial vote, even though there's 110,000 more Democrats in Nassau than Republicans. So he does have substantial capabilities. But here's an important piece: name recognition. 64% of voters don't know Bruce Blakeman, and here it is. The end. This poll was taken the end of March.
Yeah, well, that's the point, Ralph. That 18 and 18, favorable, unfavorable. When almost 2/3 are really not aware of you, then you need to be spending big bucks across the state, because you can't win the election by winning Nassau by itself. And so that's what I was talking about. he needs the funding, and he needs to front load this campaign. He can't wait till the fall to suddenly begin to run a campaign. He needs to level off the playing field over the next couple months so that when he gets into the fall, he can then be more focused on specific issues and what he's going to do about it. So,
and that takes money.
That's the point. It takes countless millions of dollars. It's not like $5 million, $10 million anymore. It's now, it could be a $30 or $40 million race. And can he raise it? And because otherwise, we're going to get people, Democrats, coming out to send a message to Washington as much as to Albany.
Well, you're right. I mean, this is a very critical election because if Trump doesn't have Congress, he's in trouble. And so they will impeach him if he doesn't maintain either, the control of both or at least the control of one.
But he won't be convicted, even if...
No, I understand that. It's all about politics. It's all about negativity. Yeah. That's why every race is every Democrat runs against Trump. It's, no matter where the race is.
And then, it was that same way 2 years ago when, Biden was so weak and his replacement was even weaker. So, it's, as we've both been involved for many, many years, there is this ebb and flow that we see through decades of politics, And right now, with everything going on, with inflation, with gas prices, it's not a good time. Now, there's still time for that to change, but it needs to start pretty soon, or else we're going to be facing some real challenges in the fall.
So in terms of the statewide races, first of all, so we've talked about the governor's race, and Kathy, she is a very capable campaigner, and she'll tell you what she believes you want to hear. Like I say, she's not very deep. It's not very truthful. She just tells people. She has her little clips, and it amazes me that her clips are about affordability when clearly the Democrats have created a situation against affordability. But that's her clip. Now, what about Letitia James? What about the controller? Where do you have a feeling for those kind of races?
My feeling is real simple. To be a straight line party vote once you get beyond the governor's race.
So that's what you think. So Letitia James, as bad as that woman is, and we have a very strong candidate in this Saritha. I mean, she's a very articulate, good-looking young woman. She's out there campaigning. So you think it's more about top of the ticket?
It's affiliation margin and money. Now, I've not seen in recent years a Republican down-the-ballot race, statewide race, where they've had the type of money that they needed to be serious candidates. And people are going to be focused on the governor's race and the national politics. And so these other, we've put up some really good candidates through the years.
Yes.
But without money and, without prior name recognition, no one knows who they are. I bet if they did name recognition on our candidate, it'd probably be below 10%.
Yeah.
That's the problem with politics today. We got an awful lot of capable people who could do a much better job than a lot of incumbents, but they first have to get there. And that's where incumbency and affiliation margins make the big difference.
So now we have this matching funds, though, in terms of the Assembly, the Senate, and the statewide races. That does give us an opportunity. All right, we're going to take a break here, and then we're going to talk some more about statewide races. We need to talk, obviously, about congressional races this year. We need to talk about where Trump happens to be, so there's a lot more to come. Again, we're here in studio with Barry Zeflowitz, who's a poller, who's been polling these races on the Republican side for 4 decades. So he knows all about polling. He knows about what it takes, how to change opinions, what is important when you're in a race. We've been talking about the governor's race and the state races. So tell us now, let's switch a little bit to the federal side. Obviously, the Congress and the Senate are extremely important this year for Trump. How do you see that situation unfolding?
Well, again, if we're looking at where things are beginning of April, I think there's a national consensus among professionals that the Congress, particularly the House, could very well change and become Democrat with so few numbers needing to be changed. The Senate may be more difficult for them, but again, right now, if that election were held this week, there could be a very, very serious loss of Republican seats. And it'll be because the only way people really can voice their opinion about how things are going nationally is by voting against their local congressman or the senator who represents the state. The president's war with Iran is very unpopular. No matter what he says about prices coming down the minute the war ends, the fact is that right now gasoline is gotten out of hand. Inflation is, at least perceived as continuing to grow. And so right now, in the beginning of April, we're in a very, very bad economic environment. And that's what people will vote on when they get out to the polls. And so, particularly here in New York, where the president's favorable rating is only 35% with over 60% unfavorable, that just is going to hurt local candidates at all the levels, unfortunately. And that's the challenge that, our members of Congress and Senate and Assembly members have to deal with in the coming months.
So I have a sheet here that talks about a number of polling. It has Rasmussen, Harvard, Fox News, New York Times, CNN, and you see different approval ratings for Trump in every one of these things. I guess that's sampling, right?
Look at Rasmussen has a history of having more Republican, more positive Republican numbers than any other pollster. And as you can see it right there. There is a hardcore support for the president that's in the 35 to 40% range. However, it's that 10% differential there that will decide elections. And so, again, a lot of it has to do with sampling. A lot of it has to do with methodology. But I will share with you, and if you're looking at the results of a poll, look at what they say about this. The gold standard in polling, since the day I began 49 years ago doing this, is that we would draw random samples among a total voter base so that every single person in the country or in the state or in a congressional district would have an equal opportunity to be called by selecting people at random. Secondly, the gold standard, I call it that because it's the way that traditionally has been most successful. Live interviewers making direct calls with people selected at random. What's happened in recent years is there's been things called robo-polling, where you'll pick up the phone and you'll hear a recorded message asking you to punch a 1 or a 2, depending on what your opinion is of. The problem with first of all, anytime you get a poll like that, you can be assured that, first of all, it's not on your cell phone because they're not allowed legally to call cell phones. And two, that they are just calling random names without even knowing whether you're a registered voter or whether you're a 5-year-old kid who picks up the phone and just starts pushing buttons, or who you're actually talking to. And so there's a lot of questions about that. And recent polling that I know locally, in a poll that was important to people, it was off like 20 points just 10 weeks out from the election. Another new one, which has been promoted, is where you'll get a text message and asking you if you'll do a poll to go to a number online and do an online poll. Well, who's doing those polls? Are people who are only most interested in politics. It's not getting the average person. And then there's another group that now they call it online panels, where they'll be pre-selecting people who want to participate in polling and doing it where they're part of a panel online. If you look at the most credible pollsters today, you're going to find that they still are doing it the way that we've been doing it for almost 50 years, and that the really credible people like the Terrence Group, POS, some of the big national Republican pollsters, they are doing the gold standard, and that's the polling that you can trust. And take a look at what their methodology is, if you care, to delve into something.
So when to do the gold standard poll, so you have to know the constituents in your area, the voting constituents in the area you're picking, whether it's congressional, whether it's the entire country for Trump or the state for Kathy Hochul, or whether it's Erie County if we were going to poll the county executive race. So let's just take Erie County and the county executive race. So tell me how you would start. So Erie County, so I pretty much know the numbers. So Erie County has 297,000 Democrats to about 150,000 Republicans to about 15,400 conservatives to only a few thousand working families, but to 170,000 blanks. So 630,000 voters, 297, less than half, are actually Democrats, but we have less Republicans than we do blanks.
Well, the answer is...
Go ahead.
It's simple for me, but it goes something like this. And let me just give you a historic perspective. New York is one of the early states to have developed voter files so that in Erie County, the Erie County Board of Elections has a file of all registered voters. That is purchasable.
Right.
And so when you're drawing a sample, you are starting with every registered voter in the county. You then are going to randomize all those people and create a selection of voters so that every Erie County voter has an equal opportunity to be called. Now, when you draw a random sample based on random theory, which is just more statistical type of stuff, if you draw a random sample, and let's just say that you want to complete 400 interviews, although I have to tell you that back 30 years ago when Vic Farley was chairman, we used to do 600 to 800 all the time because he wanted to look at large sample sizes. But whatever that sample size is, and let's just say it's 400, which has been typical in recent polling, then the numbers are selected at random, they're fed into a computer, they then are fed out to individual interviewers so that every person across the county is being given an equal chance to be called. And if it's done properly and you have interviewers who do their job properly, you will end up with a margin of error on a poll like that of plus or minus 4.9%. And in doing so, you'll end up with 47% Democrats and about 32% Republicans and another 15 or 18% unaffiliated voters. And
but again, if the numbers are 297, or let's call it 300,000 Democrats to 150,000 Republicans to 170,000 blanks, why aren't blanks a heavier?
Well, look, I was taking those numbers off the top of my head.
Okay.
If the percentages are, within a margin of 5%, whatever that actual number is supposed to be, that's what will come out in the poll. Also, though, one of the things that impact this are a very early screening question is whether or not you're likely to vote in the upcoming election.
So that was my next question.
That's where you'll see in national elections unaffiliated voters right up there. But in local elections particularly, they fall way down. from what the norm
All right,
is.
so
And
that-
so when we do a poll, we're interested in knowing who's going to come out to vote, because those are the people who we want to know about and how then we can target.
So then do we look at what we call 4s and 3s and 2s? So a 4 is somebody who's voted in each of the last 4 elections. A 3 voted 3 times in the last 4 election. A 1 voted 1 time in the last 4. Is that part of your statistics?
Yeah, that's the answer is yes. That's part of the end statistics in terms of voting history. Is one of the demographics that we'll be able to run among people who vote 4 out of 4 times. Here's what they think. But the important thing is, you make a subjective or an objective decision in terms of who you want to reach. We may say, okay, in this governor's race, it doesn't, presidential voters are not who come out. We need to look at people who typically come out in a gubernatorial election.
Right.
Because if we start polling, let's drop this down even to the county executive level, where we're having very poor turnouts, under 50%,
Right.
I think is safe. And so if we have a 70% turnout in the presidential election
Changes
and a 40%
everything.
turnout in the county executive race, well, then we don't want to be just looking at presidential voters because we're going to get a false reading. So this is part of the strategic implication that's involved in being a good pollster and then being a good strategist, is making the right selection so that you can look at the right voters to make the right determinations in how to win an election.
So there are a lot of subjective determinations here, so that the pollster has to make. So again, in my numbers, let's say, again, there's 300,000 Dems to 630,000. So let's say there's roughly
40%.
Yeah, 47%. So let's say 150 Republicans. So there's 25%, 170
Okay.
blanks, 27 to
Okay.
30%. So, but then it goes to who's voting.
Yeah.
So if there's more Dems voting, in terms of percentage, that needs to be taken into account. So who's actually going to the polls? So there's a whole lot of subjective criteria that goes into a pollster.
It's the word subjective may not be the best word, because
Okay.
it's based on looking at the history of who are those most likely to come out to vote that we want to.
I see.
It's a two-step process. One, let's just say it's a county executive race.
Yes.
Okay. We want to look at people who have a history of voting in local elections. Those are the people who are most likely to come out year after year, and particularly in a county which is not growing, and we're getting all these new voters all the time. So we want to pick out, have a history of maybe out of the 600,000, there might be 200,000 who are normal, come out to vote
Right.
voters.
Right.
Then once we draw that sample, then we're still going to screen to see how likely they are to come out and vote in this November's election. Because if a candidate's investing all this money and we're dealing with, like, say, 400 or 600 interviews, we want to make sure that we're likely to get the people most likely to come out to vote. And one other step I'll just mention is
Okay. Go ahead.
is that when we do interviewing, we don't just take 600 interviews. If a person says yes, I'll do the survey, then they start refusing or not sure, we just would drop that person since they're not a real voter.
We're talking about polling and how polling affects all of us, how polling is done, how good polling is done. So we've talked about the demographics part of it, but there's so much to all of this. Age, party affiliation, leanings, all of that has to go into your polls, right?
Yeah. When you structure a questionnaire, it's like in several parts. One, we want to identify people who are going to vote. So we ask a screening question to begin with. Then what we'll do is we'll generally ask a question about the direction Erie County is headed. Are they on heading in the right direction, or are they off on the wrong track? And then what's very important at any level of polling is that we need to do an open-ended question to determine what are the issues or concerns that their family are most concerned about. And then after that, we'll do name recognition questions so that particularly for first-time candidates who think everybody in the community knows them, and they find that their name recognition is like under 10%, well, then they, get a wake-up call. But it allows you to, though, have a benchmark on how well known you are as well as your opponents. And then we'll get into a series of questions that many times the campaign will propose because they think these are what the issues are. And one of the jobs of the pollster is to determine whether or not those actually are the issues that matter to people or not. We'll do a ballot question, but many times early on, it doesn't mean anything because so few people really know the candidates, but it allows you, again, to create a benchmark so you can look at how you've moved over a period of time. And then finally, there's a series of demographic questions, which include age, gender, a person's political philosophy, their affiliation, the geographic area, like within Erie County. We would break out the city of Buffalo and then the northern suburbs, eastern suburbs. It's essentially have 4 or 5 areas of the county that you can look at in terms of what people think in each of these areas. And then, as I was saying during the break, we take all this information and we run it against every other question, and it helps us then provide the client with that information, whether it's in a political campaign or whether it's in an upcoming referendum or whether it's a group of information that needs to be provided to a county commission or a governor's office on issues ranging from energy to people's attitudes towards anesthesiologists in states. You can't begin to understand or believe all the issues that are out there that people are concerned about across the country.
So if you, again, we get to Erie County and you look at the situation. So I had a discussion with a candidate just the other day about Erie County and the ability for our side to win in Erie County. And my discussion, what I said was, we used to be concerned about the city of Buffalo. That was our big concern. Now it's the city of Buffalo, the town of Amherst, and the town of Tonawanda. It's all three of those. And then it's, in the last election, we lost 4 seats in Cheektowaga, which kind of used to be in the middle, could go either way. But we lost 4 seats. So does that, where do you see us here in Erie County? Can we take the county executive race? I mean, with the right candidate, hopefully we can.
I would think that's a proper statement, that with the right candidate, we can. But we have to overcome Buffalo, Tonawanda, Amherst. Yeah. And that requires having a candidate who is attractive to enough 51% of the voters in Erie County, and I think that's entirely possible. Through the years, we have a sheriff who's a Republican.
Yes. Yep.
And while the sheriff's office may be different than the county executive's office, the point is that there are a lot of ticket splitters in this county. And, for example, in Cheektowaga elected a Republican assembly member.
Yes.
And it was based entirely a lot on message. He had a good message. The Democrats' message was, I thought, way off.
Yep.
Not reflective of what people in Cheektowaga would think. And so I believe that Cheektowaga is clearly a county that, through the years, going way back to Eddie Rakowski, who was my first county executive client, we, Cheektowaga, Lancaster, West Seneca, that was always the key. Amherst at that time was not what it is today.
Right.
There are a number of good Republican candidates out there. We just need to get the right issue and be able to put enough dollars behind it to get it out to people, and we can elect a county executive.
So we see
again.
in my town of West Seneca, 50 years Democratic rule, and then Gary Dixon comes along and changes all that. Now, there's a lot of parts to all of that. First of all, he's an excellent candidate. Prior FBI, had a lot of good behind him. But the prior supervisor had made such a mess of things. She raised taxes and raised her own salary so that all the Democrats got voted out eventually. And so now West Seneca is, for the most part, a conservative Republican elected town, which is, surprising. Well, so it can be done.
Yeah.
It can be done.
I'll tell you what's sort of interesting, too, is that we, again, the political environment hopefully will be different in 2027, because I believe that in the town of Amherst, which is clearly a very blue town from when I was back in college and was a Democratic committeeman, and there were 3 election districts in the entire town that were Democrat. This town has gone through major changes through the years, but we had the issues that should and could have elected Dan Gagliardo supervisor.
Yes.
But I believe, based on the turnout, that there was a preponderance of Democrat women who came out to vote, and they were not out there to vote for the Democrat. They were out there to send a message nationally that they were not happy. And we only lost by 5 or 6 percentage points when we could have won that seat. And that's just, so 2027, we don't know what's going to be the situation back then, but there are large pockets within the county that we can win with the right message. And I think the political environment just has a heck of a lot to do with it.
But what happens on a federal level does affect state elections.
It does. It will affect this year's elections, I believe. It's not as much likely to, again, who knows what 2027 is going to bring. And that's the challenging part of, you cannot go by what happened 2 years or 4 years ago. You have to look at each election year as a new year, a new political environment, if you're going to manage and win a campaign properly.
So, where do you see the country today in terms of liberal, conservative, somewhere in the middle? Where do you see the country today?
I think today there's what's shifted since 2024 is not so much Democrats or Republicans, because any poll that you looked at, the overwhelming number of Democrats are feeling one way and Republicans the other way. It's that 1/3 of the population, unaffiliated voters, who have shifted away from the president in the last 8 to 10 months. And right now, it's not a good situation. But when I say that, I'm talking about the beginning of the month of April. Who knows what could happen in the next 60 days? We could be finished with Iran. Prices could be back down. There could be more of a focus on getting the economy back in line. And all that could help turn things around in the fall. If things continue to drag on into the fall like they are now, then that is going to make it very difficult for our candidates at all levels. But I'm not going to sit here and say that it's all lost cause, because on April 4th, things are not in a good place.
Things can change quickly.
In national politics, things can change very quickly. And then that will impact down the ballot races.
So how bifurcated are we as a nation? We're pretty bifurcated today. People don't like people because of their politics.
That's one of the very sad things, and I'm not really wanting to get into my own personal feelings, but we are a country where people today are actually defriending, or whatever you call it, people who've been friends of theirs forever because of their views on national politics. That's very sad. We just need to, on both sides just find some more common ground. If
That's not
which
happening
is-
today. People can
no.
sit in a restaurant and have a conversation, and the next table over might be a different political affiliation, and all of a sudden there's an argument. That happens.
and that's very sad.
So one of the things I want to talk about at the end here is the effect of negative ads, negative advertising. So, I've never been a fan of negative advertising. To me, I understand that they'll tell us that it works, but to me, it's the reason why so few people vote. Why we have less and less people vote over the decades. So, what do you think about negative advertising?
Well, I'll start by saying, following up on what you just said, in 1960, when I was in college, I was president of the Kennedy for President UB chapter. In that election, 80% of Erie County came out to vote.
Yes.
In the last presidential election, it was a little over half of that. When we get into the county executive races, I think it was below 40%.
Right.
And in the most recent town elections, it was down below 30%. We've just created, so that's a statistic. And so to answer it very briefly, negative advertising, people who win an election and did a lot of negative advertising say, you see, that's what it took to win the race.